Okay.
All right. Welcome and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. For anyone who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting before, I'm Claire Barrett, Archives Manager for Mayhair Archive Collective. Our guest speaker today is Susan McKendree. Susan has been living in the Asheville area for 40 years, 32 of which have been in Weaverville, where our new building is going to be. She came to BABA in 2006 at the center and felt overjoyed to connect with a community of kindred spirits. And learning about BABA's travels to the West and his work with the women Mondali ultimately led her to write her book, Blue Bus Tours. Very excited about this book today. And besides being a fantastic author and an incredibly diligent researcher, she's also a dedicated cat mom to her tuxedo cat, India Rose, named for the map of India on her chest. As a fellow cat mom, I love that. So I will hand the floor to you, Susan. Thank you so much for being here today.
Great. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh my gosh, of course.
It's very exciting.
Yes, it is.
So where shall we begin? Claire?
Hi, yes.
Where shall we begin?
Do you want to do the questions first?
Yeah, let's do the questions. And then,
Alrighty.
see if there are things that that I didn't think to talk about that people would like to know more about. Maybe.
Alrighty. Yay. I'm really looking forward to this. I get to play Barbara Walters today. Okay. So, alrighty. My first question for you is, how did you choose the topic of the Blue Bus Tours?
Well, it's always felt to me as if the tours chose me. I had been doing a long series of meetings about Baba's travels in the West, and Baba meetings back when we used to have them all the time in our homes on Sunday afternoons. And I had done a whole series of them. But then a period of time went by when I hadn't done a meeting for a while, and I was fishing around for a topic, and I thought, the question came to me, what would you like to know more about? And immediately it came to mind the Blue Bus Tours. I mean, it was so loud and clear that I didn't question it. I didn't think, oh, that's interesting. Let me think about it. Or, gosh, let's make a list. It's like, okay, it's the Blue Bus Tours. Because I'd read Meher at that point, and I'd read the memoirs of many of the women, and I knew snippets of the story, but I didn't know the whole story. So I decided to do a meeting. All I ever planned to do was one meeting. And I started to do research, and I realized that I was just in over my head. Nowhere was there a description of the tours or a chronology of the tours or a list of the people who participated in the tours and where they went. And
In the dryer.
No,
was
I
amazed.
was going to go out there, but it was all wet.
Is it raining or just
It's-
wet?
You know what? I'll do it now because they said it's going to start raining. So
It is.
Somebody needs to mute. Okay, so where was I? There was such a lack of information that first of all, I was flabbergasted, and second of all, I was like, what do I do now? And so I decided that I was only going to be able to focus on the first tour, and I would just see how that went, and go from there. So I did, and I used Lord Mayhair as my kind of my baseline for the research, and then Mayhair, and then I went to the women's memoirs. And in doing the reading, I realized that the tours were a lot more complicated than just the story of the women's experiences. There was the war, Baba's war work and his work with the musts, and also the thread of the Universal Spiritual Center, which came up later. And I realized I was only going to be able to talk about the women if I was going to create a story that was going to fit into an hour or an hour and a half. And so I did that first meeting. And And I was not confident about it because I'm not the kind of person who can deal with just bits and pieces of information. I want the big picture. I want context, and I didn't have any context, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I knew I was going to have to create it. And so I gave the first meeting, and everybody was really excited. And they said, "Oh, keep going, keep going, keep going." So I did. And about maybe 6 weeks later, I guess I did a meeting about the second Blue Bus tour. And I was very confident. Well, I shouldn't say I was very confident. I was a lot more confident about it, the whole process, than I was the first time around. And I felt that it was, my research was better, and the presentation went better. And, I thought, oh, okay, I can keep going. I can keep doing this. So that night, I was exhausted, and I went to bed, and I guess I woke up. I'm not sure really what happened, but all of a sudden, I guess I was awake, but I felt like I was floating. I was like floating on waves, like I was being buoyed up by waves of happiness. And they were specifically happiness. They weren't bliss or love. I thought, this is happiness. And I heard Baba saying to me over and over and over again, I am so pleased. I am so pleased. I am so pleased. And it was so beautiful. And to me, that was his permission, to keep going as far as I needed to go with the story. And so I did the third and the fourth presentation, and excuse me, let me get a drink here. I finished the last meeting, and one of my quandaries was where to end the story, because everybody had a different number of tours. I think Mara said there were 6 or 7, somebody else said there were 5. And from my standpoint, if this was the story of the Blue Bus tours, then the story should end when the Blue Bus was retired. And so that's how I came to that decision, to just focus on those 4 tours. So I was done with the 4th presentation, and I was so exhausted and so relieved to have it done. I thought, oh, thank you, Baba. You got me through this. This is it. And everybody was like, well, what are you going to do with this? And I said, well, I don't know. I think I'm done with it. And they said, no, you're not. You have to write a book. And I thought, yeah, right, that's going to happen. Kind of left it at that, but they kept nudging me and bothering me. And once they planted the seed, I couldn't let it go. And so I spent a lot of time just having these horrible circular conversations in my head about why I shouldn't do the book, how our minds work.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that it was going to be too much. And then I realized that I wanted to do it. And I also realized the experience that I had had in the past, I was prepared to do it. I just wasn't prepared to take on something so massive. I think it was the size, the magnitude of the story that frightened me. But and so this went on for a few months, I guess. And then that summer at the Music Sahavas at the end, Charlie Gardner came up and asked me if I would take over doing the set decorations for the Southeast Gathering. And I mean, he really buttered me up. It was so Charlie. It was so cute. And it was describing how my artwork, you could just see my artwork in the background and everything. And I listened. And then, I realized that a response was required. And it was like I felt a shift. It was like everything stopped for a moment. And then it started up again. And then I said, I'm sorry, Charlie, I can't do that. I'm writing a book. And that's just how it came out. The words just shot out of my mouth so quickly that, I wondered if somebody else hadn't said them for me. And I thought, oh my God, I've said this out loud. Now I have to do it. There was no backing down. And so that's how the book began.
Wow.
It's a very long answer.
Wow, my gosh. That was the build up to it. Had you ever thought about writing a book before this, or was this the first time?
No, I had thought about writing. I've always loved books, even as a child, and I loved to write. And I had as my mother said, an overactive imagination. And my best friend Audrey and I made a vow that we were both going to write books, but they were going to be the great American novels. And of course, that didn't happen. But then as I became older, I started thinking about memoir. And I actually began working on a manuscript based on the journal that I kept the first time I visited India, which was before I knew about Baba. And I couldn't get it to go anywhere. There was no arc, there was no denouement. And I didn't know where it should end because, my spiritual journey, the further I moved from that trip to India, the more I realized that it was just a stepping stone. It wasn't the story. And so I just put it aside and gave up. And I've written a lot of poetry. But, I thought about the research that I had done when I worked at Biltmore Estate. During the time that I was there, we had a wonderful succession of manuscripts coming in, and it was my job to do something with them. And I transcribed them and researched them, to create a context for them. And I realized, there were footnotes and bibliographies and everything that you're supposed to do. And I realized that if I pieced them all together, I would have written the book already. And I think that's what helped me over that last hump, and helped me realize that it was something that I could do.
Mhm. Well, I, for one, am very grateful for that because we have this beauty. But you mentioned feeling like you had been kind of prepared for this project. How do you feel like Baba prepared you to commit to a project of this magnitude? Because this is quite an undertaking.
I think it was just all those things from my childhood, from the very beginning, my love of books and words, all the way through to the 15 years at Biltmore and all that research experience that I accumulated, and writing experience that I accumulated when I was there. It was obvious to me later, looking backwards, Erich always said that there is no path, that the path is forming behind us. And you have to look behind yourself to see how it's brought you there. And I think that's so true. That was really true in my experience anyway.
Yeah. So, how did you begin with writing? What was the first part of this book that you
Well,
wrote?
it's kind of silly. I started by writing the author's preface because I just wanted to write. I had the urge to write, and for some reason, that's what I ended up starting with. People usually write that stuff last. And of course, I ended up rewriting it a lot before the book was published, but that's where I started. I think maybe I was procrastinating a little bit, but then finally I thought, okay, I have to do this. So I took out the text of my first talk and I thought I'll start here. Well, I couldn't start there because it was only a quarter of the story of what was going on during the tours. And then I also realized that I needed to create a context for it, for the readers, which was really about Baba's work with the women and how he prepared them to have this experience and to survive it. And so I started I ended up going back to 1924 when Mara met Baba, because that's when that work began. And, it was like weaving together, it was like forming a braid, because first there was the story of Baba's work with the Eastern women, and then there were the Westerners. Well, first there were the Europeans, and then there were the Americans, and then Baba brought them all together in Cannes. And, it felt like I was creating this really beautiful braided story about how he prepared them and why they were the ones, how, he kind of separated the wheat from the chaff. Some of them fell away, but there was this core group that was always there for him and with him. And those were the women that he chose for the tour. So I backed up and started with that, and then I realized that I just needed to throw away the first presentation and start from scratch. And so that's what I did. And it was really daunting at the beginning. I had to start with Lord Mayhair, and it just felt so dry and unengaging. I mean, I had this quote that I had found that years before that had just always stayed with me, that I would rather live in a bungalow of stories than a warehouse of facts. And it's from a theologian named Thomas More, contemporary theologian. And that was always in the back of my mind, that I wanted to create a story and a narrative. And Lord Mayhair is not a narrative in that way. In a way, it's a warehouse of facts. And I'm not meaning to say something derogatory about Lord Mayhair, because I don't know where I could have begun if I hadn't had that resource. But I started with that, and then I started in with Mayhair, and just those two sources alone had nearly 500 pages of information about the tours, which of course I had to break down chronologically. And after I wove in the stories from Mayhair, the story started to come to life. And then I went with the memoirs of the memories of the other women. I looked at the articles from the Mayhair Baba Journal. And, I found after a while I had this sequence of references that I went to, in order, in an effort to be organized with such a volume of information. And so that was how I got started with it.
Mhm. So did you have any kind of writing schedule for yourself to keep yourself, in the groove or something?
That evolved fairly quickly. I was so excited and enthusiastic at the beginning that I'd try to work 7 or 8 hours a day, and that just was too much. I'd be exhausted and brain dead by the time I quit, and then I wouldn't want to cook dinner. I want to eat cereal for dinner, and I'd be so tired that I could hardly even watch TV, much less read something. And I thought, okay, that's not going to work. So what I figured out over a short period of time was that 6 hours was probably my maximum. And sometimes I went over it if I was like really into a passage and I didn't want to lose the momentum. But I worked 6 hours a day, probably between 5 and 6 days a week. And sometimes I would work 7 days a week. Again, it was the momentum. And I hated having to stop and do things like, cook my dinner and clean my house and cut the grass. Everything felt like an interruption to the writing. The writing just felt like the thing that I wanted to be doing. And what was I going to say? Well, anyway, I finished the first chapter. I finished the first tour, I guess, or the first chapter on the first tour. I mean, the story was so big that I realized that I was going to have 2 chapters for most of the tours. I'm like, this is just not what I anticipated, and it's really a good thing that Baba spoon fed it to me, that I had those realizations one at a time along the process, because if I had known at the beginning how big it was going to turn out to be, I might have been frightened away. So he knew what he was doing by spoon feeding me, this process, and I took it really seriously. I was at my computer by at the latest 9 o'clock in the morning, and sometimes I was there way earlier than that. And I was always dressed. I thought of it as my job. And Baba was my boss. And somebody said to me, "Oh, you're working at home, you're writing, you can sit in your pajamas and nobody will ever know." Well, I never went to work in my pajamas. I felt that would be disrespectful. I mean, and that's just me speaking. I'm not speaking for anybody else, but for me, that felt like it would be disrespectful. So I never did that. I never did that.
I can totally understand that. So, when in this process of writing the book did you begin to feel confident enough to talk to the Share Our Foundation?
That was when I thought I was halfway through the first draft of the book. I was in the middle of the second tour. And I thought, and I went back and edited and edited and edited what I had already done, in an effort to bring it up to the point where I felt like I let somebody else read it. And so I went down to the center, and I went down. Tony Atmore drove, and I went down with her, which is important later in this little story. But I went to see Sheila and Andy, and, I'm all anxious about this. And they're like, well, we already know all about this. Winnie's told us, and so-and-so's told us. And, they said, we're on board, we think you should keep going with it. So that was, a sigh of relief. And we talked about it a lot and how it was different from other books that the foundation had published, because those books were all written by people who knew Baba or who knew the Mandali. They had first person experiences with those people, and I didn't have that. And I was doing something that was really different from what anybody had done, which was to take what those people had to say and to weave them into I guess, a continuous narrative to tell a bigger story. And they were very encouraging. But then they said, oh, well, Andy said, well, you're going to have to go to India and do research. And I thought, oh, yeah, I am. Because I didn't have the money to travel to India. I thought, how am I going to do this? How am I going to manage this? Well, as it turned out, someone offered me a ticket at a point. But I left that meeting with them. I was just walking on air. I was so buoyed up and so happy with their enthusiasm, kind of infused me with more enthusiasm for keeping going with the book. And I walked back to the center, and I went into the refectory kitchen, and it was like jammed with people. And you know what it's like when it's full of people. There's just this babel around you, and it's all this noise, and you can't hear what anybody's saying, but it's loud. And all of a sudden, excuse me, out of this, what sounded like static, this one voice came up out of everything else. And they said, well, that Baba always said that if you can't afford to go to India, you shouldn't go. And, my heart just sank. It just deflated me. And I thought, oh my gosh, what do I do with this? And from that point on, there was this terrible battle going on between my head and heart about having to go to India. And it was so bad that I couldn't sleep. I mean, I could not sleep. And by the time we left the center, I was so exhausted that I don't think I could have driven myself home. So I was really grateful that I had come down with Tony. And I went home, and this internal battle just continued. And finally, after about a week, I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm going to die if I don't get some sleep. And so I went to my altar, my kind of go-to photograph of Baba, and I just laid it out in front of him. And I said, I don't know what to do. What do you want me to do? And immediately it felt like this weight was shifted from my shoulders. And later I thought, why didn't I just do that at the center? Why didn't I just do that in the lagoon cabin and save myself all this mental suffering? But I didn't. So that night I went to bed, head hit the pillow, and I was out. I don't even remember taking a breath before I fell asleep. And I stayed asleep until sometime early in the morning, maybe 3 or 4 o'clock, I guess. I mean, I didn't wake up to look at a clock, but all of a sudden I felt Baba's presence, and I opened my eyes, or at least I think I opened my eyes, and he was standing next to my bed. And And then he moved away from me, and all of a sudden, I wasn't in my bed anymore. I was facing him. We were, a distance apart, but we were just like suspended in this empty space. I don't know how to describe it. It wasn't even a space because it didn't seem to have boundaries. And it seemed to be very dark, but I think that was because Baba appeared to be made of light. I mean, he really did. He was incandescent. And it felt as if he had pulled all of the light and energy from the universe into himself. And he was ageless. You couldn't tell how old he was. His hair was open, and flowing, and he had on his white sadra and pajama bottoms and sandals. And he was just so beautiful. I've never seen him look so beautiful in a photograph or a film. And he was just right there. And it was, of course, this was all enacted in silence. And after a second, he put his arms out like this to me, and I was in his arms. I don't even remember running to him. I just remember being in his arms. And he was holding, I put my arms around his waist, and I had just read about Mansari and how he was so irritated with her because she would hug him so tightly. And I had this lucid thought, oh my gosh, I can't hold on tight. He won't like that. So I was trying to hold him. I couldn't not hold on to him, but I was trying so hard to hold him lightly. And he had his arms around my shoulders, and he had turned my head so that this part of my face was touching his shoulder. And all of a sudden, I felt myself dissolving. It felt like this part of my face that was touching his shoulder had melted away, and that I was melting into him. And that, I mean, it was so beautiful because it was so effortless and so unexpected. But then the thought came to me, oh my gosh, I want to stay here forever. I wish I could stay here forever, Baba. And the moment I had that thought, it was over. And everything just kind of dissipated. But I heard him say to me, I'm waiting for you. That was the only sound that I remember hearing. And then suddenly I was back in my bed. It was like I was gasping for breath. I felt as if I had been my body had been in some kind of suspended animation for, I don't know how long. It was kind of like waking up from a dream when you wake up kind of gasping like that. That's how it felt. And I was kind of shaking, and I thought, oh my God, did that just happen? And then I thought, I couldn't make that up, And so I laid awake for the rest of the night and into the early morning, just trying to remember it, and to cement it in, not in my head, not that kind of memory, but in my heart, because it was so extraordinary. And I thought, what did that mean? And I thought when he said, I'm waiting for you, he was talking about me coming to him eventually. It's still the 8 million lifetimes that I have to go, and then I will come to him, and that's how it would feel. But it wasn't until dawn that I realized that that was my response. That was his response to my question about what he wanted me to do. And I thought, well, he's waiting for me. I have to go. And so after that, there were no more questions. And I started, putting all my stuff together. And you know how pilgrimage to Mehrabad is. I mean, the pilgrimage starts when you make the decision to go. And I started, I set a place aside to put all my things that I wanted to take. And from there, it was just a given that I was going to go there and do that. And, the experience, just when I try and talk about it, it just, I feel like I almost demean it because language just can't capture the feeling of what it was like to be with him. And yet, I want to talk about it, when it's appropriate to talk about it. I want to share it because sharing it keeps it alive for me, I guess. And when I think back on it, it's kind of like if I never ever have another Baba dream or another experience, that word that we use to stand in for so many things, if nothing like that ever happens again in my life, it's okay, because I cannot imagine anything better than what that was like, or more significant, or whatever. Again, the words are failing me at this point. So
Oh, oh, oh my gosh, that is so special.
it 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 was, and I don't, when I say that, I think, oh no, I'm saying I'm special. I am not special, but Baba gave me that experience for whatever reason, and the experience was really special.
Yeah.
It's what was special.
Woo.
So you can see why I was never tempted not to to quit writing the book.
Yes, I can. Oh my
It
gosh.
had my back, and
Yeah.
and that's all I needed to know.
So when you finally got to the archives at Mehrabad, what was it like, and what materials there did you have access to when you were working there?
It was a really phenomenal experience, but it took a while for it to take shape. Sheila was kind of paving the way for me to to be able to go in and do the research, because they're not set up for people to do what I wanted to do. And so Sheila was kind of trying to facilitate that for me. And what's interesting is that when I had gone to Mehrabad the first time, I volunteered to work in the archives. So they already knew me. And that's just another one of those things that Baba did. I really feel strongly that Baba did to prepare me to be able to go in there and work on the book. But it took them about 4 or 5 days. I don't know why I was so impatient. The moment I got over jet lag, which took me a couple of days, I started just chewing on this fact that I didn't come here to be a pilgrim. I came here to do research. I came here because I'm writing a book. And why can't I work on my research? And why can't I get in the archives now? And it was like he was just really winding me up, until somebody said to me, well, if that's how you feel, maybe that's how he wants you to feel. And wow, did that take the air out of my sails, and then I had to stop and think about that. Well, why does he want me to feel like this? And I won't go through the whole mental process or whatever of questioning myself that I went through to get to the bottom of it. But I realized that when I was writing the book, it felt like I was in contact with Baba. And when I wasn't writing, that contact was cut off. And I all I wanted, it wasn't that I wanted to be writing the book. I wanted to be
I'll take this upstairs, my baby. Oh, I don't think I've got it.
Mute, please. Sorry.
it was that I wanted that feeling of connection, of being with him. And that's when I realized, you remember how he said the longing is the connection? I never got that, because it's not something that you can understand here. It's something that you can only, I guess, experience in your heart. And I experienced it, that was the connection. And after that, I just felt all of the frustration and, yeah, a little bit of anger dissipate. And I just felt like I felt completely different. And so the next morning, that Saturday morning, when I went again to the Samadhi, that's when I realized him saying, I am waiting for you. And before I went in, well, I always stop and kind of compose myself, and take a deep breath before I step across the threshold. And I had the thought, Baba, I'm here. I'm here. And then I went in and bowed down. And then after that, every time that I bowed down, no matter where it was, I said that to him. I'm here, Baba. I'm here. And it just was such a sweet connection to him, to have that. But then that weekend, I guess I went to Marizod, and oh, I know, it was raining really, really hard. It was like monster storms at night. And there was a monster storm that Friday night, and Saturday morning when I came out to walk to breakfast, the garden was just, it was just pristine. The birds were singing, and you could hear raindrops kind of pattering off the leaves where it was dripping, and I could smell the flowers. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in paradise. This is paradise. And I thought, if my pilgrimage was nothing more than this for the rest of the 3 months, I'd be happy. And so, I was like that for a couple of days. I was just blissed out. And Monday morning, I got ready after breakfast, I got ready to go to the Samadhi again. And I still was just kind of like floating along. And one of the boys from the office came and got me and said, you have a phone call. And I went and picked it up, and it was the archive saying that they were ready for me. And they, not that day, they wanted me to come up the following day and get started. So that was a really long-winded way of telling you about that. But to me, it was a really important part of the process, And so I went up to the archives 4 days a week. I went on the days that alternated with the days that I went to Marizod. I started out going up 4 days a week. So that was 4 days in the archives and then 3 days at Marizod. But after about 2 weeks, I was exhausted. And again, I realized I was pushing myself too much. And so I went to the archives on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I would meet the Megan and Meredith when I was usually waiting for them to open up. And they would let me in, and I'd go in, and they would set me up at a computer. And I don't know how many of you have been inside the archives in that room where the computers are, but they have like, I don't know, 12 computer stations set up, but they don't all work at the same time. And every morning when I went in, it felt like they put me on a different computer, which was kind of disconcerting, I guess. But I had made this pact with myself that no matter what they told me to do, I was going to say yes and do it, because it was easier than saying, well, this is how I usually work or whatever. And so, I didn't say anything. I just sat down at whatever computer they put me at. And they gave me Xerox copies of three of Mani's diaries, four of Mani's diaries. And honestly, I hardly knew where to start. I looked at Mani's Blue Bus Tours diary, and I meant to bring it along so I could show you my copy of it. But it was overwhelming. It was like every word of it was gold, was a pearl. And I just didn't even know where I would start with it. So I decided to start at the beginning, which happened to be a couple of diaries that she kept in the period of time going up to the tours, from the time all the women congregated at Mehrabad, when he brought them all together before they knew there was going to be a tour. And then there was a separate diary. So there were typed pages, loose pages that went in a notebook, I guess. And then the second one started with his announcement of the tours, or how he, kind of made the announcement slowly and then dropped the bomb on them, and what that process was like. And some of the entries kind of overlapped chronologically, so I knew I was going to have to weave those together, but I couldn't think about that at the time. All I could do was transcribe and transcribe and transcribe. And then there was the diary that Monty kept in Bangalore, which is a really big fat diary. It was in a leather case. There's a picture of it in the book, and it had a little flap that came over and you unsnapped it and opened it up, and it was from the Bangalore Publishing Company or something. And so I went through that next. But it was taking a lot of time. And the other thing that was happening that was causing it to take more time was that the power kept going out.
No.
I know we've all experienced that at Maribod. And the power would go out, my computer would go down, and I couldn't log back in. I would have to ask Meredith to stop what she was doing and log me back in. And after a while, she got tired of that. And I guess I can't really blame her. But for security reasons, they could not allow me to log in on my own, or they would not. So that was kind of an ongoing issue, and it became more of an issue as time went by. And I was also reaching a point where I was really afraid. I wanted to look at photographs. I wanted to look at documents from the Adike Irani collection. And then I had Monty's diary staring at me. And so I thought, well, I might as well be hanged for a sheep as a lamb. And I went in one morning, I guess it was a Friday morning, and I said to Meredith, and I knew I was treading on eggshells to ask this, but I said, I am just not sure that I'm going to be able to get through all of this documentation in the next 6 weeks. I said, with my fingers crossed and taking Baba's name in the background, I said, is there any way you could let me take home a Xerox copy of the Xerox copy of Monty's diary? Because I said, I don't know where to start. Every word of it has value. And I made the mistake of saying, I know that you can't make the decision. You have to talk to everybody else. And she didn't like that. But she said, yeah, we'll talk about it and I'll let you know. And I thought, well, I've screwed that up. And so I came back in on Monday and I started to set up my computer. And Meredith said, oh, you don't have to do that. She said, we decided we're going to let you have a copy of the diary. But you're going to have to take it to Ahmednagar and have a copy made of the copy. And why they did that, I will never know, because there's a copier in the archives. And I was happy to pay for it, whatever it cost. I didn't care what they charged me. But she said, no, you have to take it to the copying place in Ahmednagar that we use. And I thought, okay, here's an adventure about to happen. And it really was. It was just a crazy experience. We get to the place and my driver is waiting for me to get out. And I'm looking up and down the street and all the signs are in Farsi. I don't see a sign that says copying services. And he realized then that I didn't know where I was going. And so he pointed it out to me. And it was this, how in their strip malls, how you've got the shops that are down below that you walk downstairs to get into, and then the shops above that you have to climb up some stairs. Well, the stairs were this prefab set of metal stairs that didn't reach the sidewalk. There was about a 2-foot gap between the sidewalk, at least a 2-foot gap between the sidewalk and the bottom stair. And I literally had to heave myself up using the railing to get onto the stairs. And I went up and it was dark inside. They didn't have any lights on, I guess because it was cooler that way and saved electricity. But I explained what I needed and the man was really nice. And he took the pages into the back room and gave them to this boy who looked like he was like in the 8th grade or something. And he had to hand feed all of those pages into a copier, which didn't have a document feeder. And it took forever. And but that's what it was going to take. And finally he was done and they gave me the copies back and the original copy and I paid for it. And I think it was like 175 rupees, which is nothing. And then I had to go back out and jump down the step. And then I had to find my rickshaw driver in a mass of like 100 rickshaws. And I couldn't remember what he looked like, what he was wearing. And finally he waved at me and I'm like, oh, thank God. And so I went back and we went back to the archives and I gave them their copy of Monty's diary back. And they said, oh no, we have to have your copy too. And I'm like, okay. They were so, the security is such that they kept that copy for me until it was time for me to come home. And when it was time for me to come home, I had to sign for it. It felt like I was signing away my first grandchild. That on pain of death, you will not share this information with anyone. And so that's what I had to do. But to back up a little bit, when Meredith told me that I could have a copy of Monty's diary, she said, oh, and we've also decided that I'm just going to take the photographs and the documents from Adi K. Irani's collection that pertain to the period of time that you're doing, and we're just going to put them on a disc and you can take them home with you. And I just thought, oh my God, I never even thought to ask for that. So Baba was really looking out for me. And at that point, and also I had to leave them there until it was time to go home and sign other documents for them. But I was exactly halfway through the time that I was supposed to be there. And I had planned on spending all of those 3 months working in the archives. And all of a sudden, I wasn't going to the archives anymore. I was a pilgrim. And it was weird. It was like I wasn't prepared for that. I had to kind of think about that. And again, the head kicked in and was saying, kind of nudging me, saying, well, you could go home now. You don't have to stay. You can just go home and start writing the book. And I could just hear Baba rolling his eyes, see Baba rolling his eyes in the background, like, yeah, she's really going to go home. So I was a pilgrim for the last 6 weeks. And it was absolutely wonderful because I didn't have any expectations of what that was going to be like. So I spent hours in the Samadhi. There were hardly any Westerners there. I spent 2 hours in the Samadhi by myself one morning, which was really extraordinary. And I could sit outside and watch the Indian. It was especially interesting to watch the Indian pilgrims come and go in because I don't know, their devotion to Baba manifests in a different way than ours does, kind of, or at least I've noticed that. And I spent hours and hours just wandering around Upper Maribad, walking past the women's graves, talking to the women. I started talking to them when no one was there and thanking them for the stories that they left behind. I'm getting goosebumps just remembering what that was like. I mean, I felt like I was almost having conversations with them because I don't remember what I calculated, maybe 17 out of the 19 women who are buried up there participated in the Blue Bus tours to one degree or another. And so I felt like I was surrounded by them, and instead of Baba's energy in the Samadhi felt a lot softer, and it almost felt like he pulled back so that I could experience being with the women. And I would just walk from grave to grave, and over to the other graves that are set apart, to Nani's tomb, which is really like a little darga. And I would talk to them, and I would walk around the pet cemetery, which just killed me every time because I was writing about those animals that were buried in the pet cemetery. And, the first time I saw Moti's grave, I'd seen it before, but this time it just really got me and I kind of burst into tears. But it was a really powerful experience of being up there and soaking in their energy. I mean, sometimes I just went and sat on the steps. There's really horribly steep steps that come down from the dormitory that everybody was afraid Elizabeth was going to fall down at 5 o'clock in the morning. I would just sit about halfway up the stairs and imagine the women coming up and down, passing me by. So I really feel like that experience informed the book because it just deepened my relationship with those women, those amazing women.
It's incredible. So the experience obviously played a good part in writing the book. How did the materials that you mentioned collecting in India change the way that you were working on the book, if
Well,
anything at all?
it totally changed because now I had Monty's diary. I didn't have to start with Lord Mayhair, and that was such a relief. But before I could even start a new chapter, which I was chomping at the bit to do, I had to go all the way back to the beginning of the book and weave in Monty's stories and all of the other material that I had gathered. And it felt daunting at the beginning, but it went more quickly than I expected. And then I got to the new chapter and I was so excited. And I started out using Monty's diary, Blue Bus Tour's diary, to create, I guess I thought of it as the weft of the story. I really love the metaphor of weaving for writing a book. And now Monty's words were the weft of the story, and everything else provided the color and texture that brought her stories to life, but also brought everybody else's stories to life. And it felt like, I was thinking the other day, it was like making a layer cake, kind of, Monty's diary on the bottom, and then Lord Mayhair to get it out of the way, and then another layer with Mayhair, and then the memoirs, and it was just like a really tall layer cake. And I made it. I made a checklist, which I'd never done before, of all the sources and the kinds of sources that I was leaving, because I was so afraid of leaving something out. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was, I think that was it Slave of Love? Is that the name of the memoir about Donkin? Anyway, Donkin's diaries. Donkin's diaries became available, and I started weaving them in, and oh my gosh, it just added a whole new layer to the cake. It added a new voice. It added a man's voice, a man's perspective. And I already had a little bit of that from Erich and from, some of the other men, but not so much. And, the thing about Duncan was, his was a continuous voice, and he had such a wonderful way of melding his doctors, his medical observations of Baba with his love for him. And it made his stories very unique. And I realized that I was creating this that there were all these voices that were forming the story. And then at that point, I went to mandalihall.org, and I started listening to Merwan and his stories of his experiences. And his voice was like the icing on the cake. Did you just see a little tail disappear behind me?
Yeah.
Because it was a child's perspective, and it just added, like, I don't know how to describe it. It was just like the final touch, like when Baba touched up the painting, the portrait that Rano did, and he just took a little dab of white paint and put it on one of his eyes. Well, that's what it felt like, weaving Merwan's stories into it.
Oh,
Really, really sweet.
oh yeah, everything building on top of each other. That is incredible. Oh my gosh. So you said that you've never felt, so overwhelmed that you wanted to stop. Obviously,
No.
you had enough motivation, but did you ever get really stuck with the process? I know for myself, I am so impressed with this. Did you ever get stuck?
I did. I would finish a section, and then I wouldn't quite know where to go from there. Especially the Bangalore chapters were really hard to write because there was not so much of the travel aspect, but there was the tourism aspect, I guess you'd say, of all the things that Baba did with the women and all the work. But he was also really heavily engaged with the musts. The war had started, and this is where the Universal Spiritual Center really started to take shape. And I just, I would get to a point where, Baba, I don't know what to do next, help me. And what I did when I reached that point was I just said, okay, well, I know I need to write about this, so I'll just start writing about that. And sooner or later, it'll fit into the story. And that's what I did. I had these wonderful experiences of working with a teacher named Peggy Millen, who used to do women's writing workshops here in Asheville. And they were an amazing experience, and she taught me so much. But one of the basic things she taught me was just to keep writing, that even in class, if we were writing to prompts or, just some silly thing, you think you've run out of things to say, but keep going. It doesn't matter what you say, it can be kind of gibberish. Eventually a thought will jump out, and then you'll be able to keep going. And that's what I did. I mean, I didn't feel like I ever wrote gibberish exactly, but everything fell together. And I would find these wonderful quotes that I feel like there was a disconnect between like this section and the next section. And then I'd find a quote like from Margaret that was the perfect segue from one part to the next. And that was almost like a magical part of the process, the way that happened. But I never wanted to stop. I wanted to know when it was done that I had tried my best.
So this, almost the scariest part of writing is actually submitting the manuscript. So when you submitted the manuscript to the Sherry Foundation, how did you feel when you finally handed it off to the editor? This incredible work.
Well, I felt a relief. I felt a weight taken off of my shoulders because now it was in Baba's court. I had given it. And before I went in, actually, the day that they were meeting was my anniversary of coming to Baba, that Saturday. And so that Friday, before I went into the meeting with Sheila and Andy, I didn't have a hard copy of it because it was so long. I didn't want to print it out, but I had the disc that I was going to give them. And I took it in and I put it on his chair. I probably not supposed to do that, but I put it on the seat of his chair. It was really light. It didn't hurt anything. And I bowed down and I said, Baba, this is yours. Do with it as you please. And it really did. I felt, I guess, this sense of relief and accomplishment. But there was also anxiety because I didn't know what was going to happen. Well, it took them a year and a half to make a decision because they had so many things in the pipeline ahead of my book. And I was starting to feel like nothing was ever going to happen. In fact, they made the decision in October of 2016, and Andy didn't remember to tell me until I called him about something else in like January or February of 2017. And he said, oh, by the way, the foundation is going to publish your book. And I'm like, what? Tell me, how could you think this wasn't important information? Excuse me. So that was kind of funny in retrospect, but it was like a hurry up and wait process. Well, actually, after that was the hurry up and wait process. After that, it just it took off. It as Sheila said, the bus had wheels, and I knew what the components of the book were going to be, and I had completed as many of them as I could ahead of time, but I didn't know where to go from there. And it was really a relief to have somebody to take over responsibility and just tell me what to do next. So that was good, but it came in fits and starts. And I guess the first project was to hand it off to Leah Florence to edit it. And that was terrifying. That was truly the most terrifying part of the experience, because I thought, oh my God, what if she just doesn't like my writing? Well, it turned out that was not an issue. What was an issue was that it was too long. And I had spent so much time creating these wonderful sidebars about the places that Baba and the women visited, and, other stories that I thought, were really, they weren't digressions. They needed to be part of the Blue Bus Tour story. Well, about half of them went by the wayside. I had to delete about half of them. And at first I would look at them, which ones she deleted. But it was so painful that after a while I just said, okay, fine, delete what needs to go. And I didn't even look at what she took out because it hurt too much. Because we had to whittle the book down to a size where it would fit in one volume paperback, because that's all they had the money to do. I would have loved 2 volumes, hardcover in a slipcase,
Mhm.
Of course I would. But I was grateful to have the book as it was. There was a copy of it here. I don't know where it went, but anyway, it doesn't matter. The book was so fat that I didn't realize I'd used up so many of my allotted pages. And so the index ended up being shorter than what I prepared. I had to take out about a third of the index, and the index was really hard to do, but, and I kind of wanted to cry, but I didn't, because, the index felt like a really important part of a big book like that. But
Mhm.
it had to go, because we could literally not have one more page of paper in the book, or the binding wouldn't hold and the book would explode. And as it was, she had to send it off to a special bindery to and use heavier paper, or cardstock, whatever it is they call the cover material, so that the book would hold together in its massive finished format.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, how does, I'm sorry, a question. How many pages was it originally? Because with the index now, it's 820 pages.
Oh gosh, I don't know. Probably 400 pages more. I don't really remember. Maybe not that much. It just feels like it was that much.
Yeah.
Um, but you get over it. And in the end, I just wanted it to be published. So
Mhm.
it's okay. Um, and when I saw it and held it in my hands, it was such a magical experience. The one thing that did happen that kind of set me back was Sheila sent me her first design for the cover, and it was kind of orange with these rusty color letters. And I hate orange. It's like my least favorite color. And I looked at it and I literally burst into tears. And I had to wait a little while before I could compose myself to email her about it. I knew not to call her because I would start crying again. But I emailed her and I said, I love the images and so forth, but I said, the color doesn't work for me. Can it please? I said, I guess I was expecting something a little more blue, but blue was too obvious. And I said, or green. And so she graciously reworked the colors. And I think she actually changed one of the fonts too that I wasn't very happy with. I was very picky, but it's my book. And I mean, I say that I don't, that I as the author, you get to make the decisions.
Mhm.
I knew this book was going to have to last forever because I had no hopes of it, even a first printing selling out. And so I wanted to be happy with the end result. And so I was. I
Yeah.
was.
Well, I'm so glad. So, what was the hardest part?
Please show the jacket just so we see the colors again.
Yes. You can see.
Further up. Yeah. No, not forward, backwards and up.
Oh, there we go. Oh,
Oh,
Sorry.
beautiful. Very beautiful.
wow.
Mhm.
Oh, that is nice.
Very beautiful with all the people around. Never saw that picture. Where did you get that picture?
It was in, I think it was in Elizabeth Patterson's collection, but I'm not absolutely sure. I think it was because they would have been in the car and the car would have been on a separate ferry. I never thought about that before. But yeah, that would have been the point of view. And it's such a great photo. Sheila, well, I guess we chose it together. It was one of the photos I gave her. And of course, I couldn't have as many pictures as I wanted, but that's to be expected. I wanted a gazillion pictures. But Sheila made the final decisions, and I was so happy with what she did and the design of the book. It's beautiful, and I can't take any credit for that. That was all Sheila's work.
Now, what was your favorite part of this whole process? What, if you had to pick one thing, what did you love the most?
It was just being with Baba. I mean, I realized that what I was experiencing was Leela, because it never felt like work. And it took me back to a time when I was in college. I did my last 2 years of undergrad work at Hood College, which was at that time, a women's college in Maryland. And they had this interdepartmental honors program. And of course, I went for it. But in order to participate, you had to have a thesis and you had to combine disciplines. So I majored in psychology, philosophy, and comparative religion. And my topic was the nature of the self. And I spent my senior year, we got 6 hours of credit for doing nothing but research. And I spent so much time in the library. I had my own study carrel in the philosophy section where nobody ever came and bothered me. And I could just leave my stuff there and go to lunch and come back. And on Saturdays, I'd be there when the library opened and I'd leave when it closed. I mean, it was such a rewarding process just doing the research. And of course, there was no laptop. It was all on 3x5 cards, but this experience of doing the research and working for Baba took me back to that, which I really remember kind of as a peak experience in my life. And again, the book is a peak experience because I got to spend all that time with Baba.
Yeah.
And I felt his presence. I felt him there with me.
Now, one more question, and then if anyone else has questions, you can ask. Okay, and then not to put you in the hot seat, but
Go ahead.
is there anything else that you're working on or any other ideas that you have for the future? Because you are very, very good at writing and researching, and I would love another one of these.
Well, I've been very resistant to the idea of writing another book, because that one took 8 years and I'm 80 years old by the time I finished another book of that magnitude. I have thought about it and there's a box of materials that in the archives at Marizad, which as of 2014 hadn't been processed, that I would have loved to get my hands on, relating to the women who lived at Upper Maribad. But I tried to send out some feelers, but it was during COVID and it just didn't go anywhere. And I thought, okay, Baba, I don't think Baba means for me to do this. And then I got this just crazy idea that I was going to write a book about Baba and World War II. And I got as far as buying a copy of The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and a big, thick, fat timeline of World War II. At which point I said, I don't think I can do this. I realized that I knew Baba's side of the story, but the historical side, I know the human interest side, because that has always fascinated me, especially the Holocaust, which would only be a little part of the book. Well, not a little part, but historically it was a really big part. But in terms of Baba, he only made one remark about the Holocaust that we know of. But there was all the battles and the strategies and the generals and commanders and everything that I just felt daunted by it. So they're on my shelf, and eventually I'll give them to Mac. But I watched this 6-part documentary on Netflix toward the end of last year. It's called Life on Our Planet, and it's narrated by Morgan Freeman, and it is the most amazing documentary of that type that I've ever watched. And it goes through the evolution of life. Each episode goes up to one of the great extinctions, and then the story starts over. And I was astonished at the resonances between some of the numbers that they threw out and things that Baba said. And I became really intrigued with how this fit in with Baba's explanations of evolution. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I watched it again in January, and this time I took notes. And out of those notes, I realized, and starting to look at Baba's words, I realized that there was a story there that I could tell. And so far, the story has evolved into 4 meetings. I sent out an email a couple of days ago about it. It's a massive subject to undertake, and I can't possibly talk about everything that is related to it. So, I've tried to narrow the focus to the 4 areas that I'm most interested in, and that I feel that I can present in some credible manner, because I'm not a scientist. And I've taken on a really big learning curve, but it's become a process of experiencing that Leela again when I'm working on it. So we'll see.
All righty. My gosh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, I will back off, and if anyone else has any questions for our wonderful, amazing guest, fire away, I guess. Thank you so much. That was just,
Welcome.
oh my gosh, I've been so much looking forward to you
Well,
since we started planning this and reading your book. Ooh, it's so good to finally meet you.
Well, I was pleased to be asked, because it's a long time since I talked about this, and the process was so amazing and complicated that I don't want to forget it. And this was an opportunity to kind of revisit it. So thank you.
Well, good. I'm so glad.
Susan, can I jump in?
Of course.
I loved your book.
Right?
Rose, this second, I gotta mute the other computer. Actually, I don't know how to do it, so I'll go in the other room. So I read your book when it first came out, and I absolutely enjoyed it. And today's talk just gives a whole, it's just a broad scope to it, to hear your account of the process. And when you said you started with the preface, when I read a book, I always like to read the preface to find out where the author's coming from. So I have to read your preface again, but I just looked at it briefly and I saw you started off with Maris, so you can't do better than that.
No,
so I'll be reading that. I have, and one other thing I wanted to comment was, when I was reading the book, I would go along with Google, and whatever the location was, I'd Google it to see pictures.
I'm so glad you did that, because
it was a wonderful, but what I really hope those things that were edited, all those sidebars, all those things, that could be a book that's maybe already written.
Well, I don't know. People have asked me about it, and I thought about it, and I can't figure out how I would do it. They don't tell a story. They would be all disconnected from one another, and I'd have to figure out how to tell it so that there was some context for them and chronology and everything. So I don't know.
Yeah, it could be a supplemental where you just reference where they were originally placed. But anyway, I just very much appreciate today's talk. And the last thing was, what was the name of that 6-part thing that you just recently?
Life on Our Planet.
Life on Our Planet.
Yeah.
Very good. Thanks so much, Jay Mayor Baba.
Mayor Baba.
Larry, you've got 3 hands up. I don't know if you're seeing that.
Yeah. Couple people, I don't know I don't know who put their hand up first. Michael?
Betty's hand has been up a few times.
Okay, well, then Betty, you can start first. Thank you for saying that.
Well, I'm going from 1 question to 3. I hope I can ask all of them. 1, you said there was some dispute or did not about how many tours there were, and you've settled on 4. Would you say that's it? That's probably the accurate. I would think so if you've written the book.
Well, it's I finally came down to the fact that it was the author's prerogative to make that decision. And I did talk about that at some point, and the difficulty of figuring out how to end the story. And it just seems so obvious to me that when the bus was retired, that was, pretty much the end of the story. Other people might disagree with me, but, I feel like when they started traveling on trains, that wasn't the blue bus anymore, and Baba's shifted his focus to his must work. It was the whole energy of those subsequent tours was different from the blue bus tours. So
Okay, now question number 2. Can you repeat what Baba's quote on the Holocaust was? Is it something you
Oh, I don't remember it.
That's all right if you
I don't remember it.
We can look at it.
Just that it was a terrible thing, but it had to happen. Kind of, like all those other statements, inscrutable statements that he made about the war and suffering.
And the 3rd is, if you do make those presentations about that doc, please do it on Baba Zoom. Please.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to be able. I've kind of put a feeler out to see if anybody wanted to manage putting it on Zoom, because it's going to be all I can do to manage doing the presentations. But Phil is going to record them, and they will go up on YouTube. So you will have a chance to see them. Maybe not the day that they happen, but eventually. So yeah, and I'm really excited about that. And just when I need another level of pressure.
Thanks so much. This has just been wonderful.
You're welcome, Betty.
Next,
Um,
McCall, I think, is next.
okay, thank you, McCall. The floor is yours. Oh, you're muted still, sorry.
So, I just have to fill in one thing. I have other things to say, but I want to fill in one thing. What is this Biltmore thing that started you, gave you this feeling that you can do this kind of work? Was it Biltmore?
I worked at Biltmore Estate. It's Biltmore.
What's that?
It's a historic property here in Asheville that was built by one of the Vanderbilts. It's this massive pile, French style chateau, French Renaissance style chateau. It's been so long since I worked there, I don't remember anymore, but 1 million people or more come to see it every year. And I worked in museum services, and my job was to do research, was to develop tours, to give talks to 12-month pass holders, and to just basically research the materials as they came in. And as I said, we just had this string of really wonderful engaging projects to work on. One of them was a diary that was kept by George Vanderbilt's best friend, Willie Field, when he and George traveled to India in 1894, because George wanted to see the Taj Mahal by moonlight.
1894 is when Baba was born.
I know.
1894. Wow.
I know. I know it was the synchronicity, in retrospect was really interesting. I wasn't with Baba. I didn't know about Baba when I did the research, but it came back to me in spades afterwards. They even had this experience that Willie wrote about wandering through the rose gardens outside of the Taj, and they met a naked man there who obviously had to have been a must, but he spoke English. And they had a conversation with him about religion and changing religions. And he told them, not to change religions because they're like changing he used the metaphor of changing your clothes, and that, they might not be comfortable for you to wear. But I thought, oh my God, who was that?
Yeah. So yeah, I thought that everyone knows what it was, and I'm the only one who doesn't know, and where you got your confidence
Yeah.
in gathering stuff. But I want to say that I have been in your first talk. You did it in Sharia Press, right? Your first talk about your book.
Yes. Yeah.
It was magical. It was magical talk.
Thank you. That was
magical.
the launch on Zoom because everybody was, we were in the throes of the pandemic. So I guess that's what Baba wanted me to have.
Yeah, so it was wonderful. And so thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing again.
You're welcome.
And for telling all these beautiful stories.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to jump in and add that, Michal, if you want to see what the Biltmore looks like, you can Google it, and you will see you'll see an incredible place.
So I see that they have a lot of these big places, that Baba is now taking one of them and making out of this big place a beautiful place for Baba lovers to gather, right? It's in Asheville, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah.
I think 1 mile from there, actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. We have Cheryl next. Yes, Cheryl. And please unmute.
Yeah, thank you. I have trouble with my doing, being able to speak and people to see me at the same time. So I have to use 2 devices. So I had to come outside. So I'm on my speaker phone right now, my smartphone. But that, I have to say, you've used the word magic several times in your talk. And I felt today was this magical story of your journey through writing this book. It just blows me away. I'm on the point of tears just sharing that with you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
And thanks. And thank you, Baba, for having Susan alive in the world at this time.
Oh Baba.
Seriously, because so much of the material that the archives have, is not, I'm not talking about Max just working on everything now, but just so much was going to be available when I'm dead.
Yeah.
That's what I keep saying to people, but come on, it doesn't have to be perfect. Although I understand Ward's point of view that yes, it does have to be perfect when it's as perfect as possible.
Yeah.
But so I wanted to say that, to share my heart, my gut, actually. The second thing is that when perhaps you could, in a sense, write another book, is this going to be is it online? And I don't know if it is or not, but when it is online, meaning that we could get it online rather than in the hard copy, you could add back in all of the things that were deleted because Jonathan mentioned, him looking up the side stories, the description. I think that was a mistake to do that. And I almost wish that we had all been told, maybe we could have, done a fundraiser so they could have put it in 2 volumes and hardcover. I would have contributed money personally to that.
Oh, that's sweet. Yeah, but don't blame, don't
blaming anybody. I'm just saying, I wish that, there might have been an opportunity to have it the way you had originally put it together. And then I thought, well, it could be done that way online. If it, how people are over in India going through books and typing them up to be online. I don't know what the language is because I'm not a very good computer person.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good idea. I'll have to give that some thought.
You know, so maybe you might have to do it. I'm not going to volunteer to do that. That would be, you know, weeks and months and maybe years of work. But but I mean, that could happen and that would be wonderful. And then, because I love reading books, I'm not going to be happy the day that we have to go onto our computer to read stuff. So I love having a book in hand. When I do a number of Zooms, mostly with the actual community or, but well, that's not true too, from West Coast, which are just wonderful. And I have always want the book with me. It makes such a difference. But then I could look up and see, well, what has Susan had there? What else is there that Susan researched? And so I think I've made my point.
Well, it would be fun to do that. And I would do that if Sherry R gets to the point where they put it up online, but I don't know if I'll live long enough, you know, for them to feel that they want to do that.
Well, isn't it India that puts stuff up online? I mean, all the books like, I don't know, like I think Creation and Its Causes is online. You know, I had to also have it. I saw it through my computer as well.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of books that are done. Someone in India, usually some of the people I know, I don't know who's doing it now, but they were Westerners who were there and they were on the spiritual aspirant path where they got
I love that.
room, and I don't know if they had to pay for their board or not, but they were there and their work was, if that's what they chose, to put things online. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Anyway, just something to be aware of, and that would be great.
Sure. I'm all for it. If the time comes that I can do that, I am all for it.
Okay. And maybe somebody could explain it better, like, you know, someone there here at our meeting. Or
I mean, it's like when directors put out the director's cut version of a movie with all the things that the editors took out.
Exactly. I love those. I always watch the director's cut.
I know, I like that version better. So I guess that's kind of what she's saying. So
yeah.
The author's version.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Should we move on? We have Farish Day next. Yes, Farish Day.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Farish Day.
Hi, sweetie. This presentation of yours was so wonderful and beautiful.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it. Such an intimate look at an author's point of view, and the process you went through was just really, really touching.
Oh, thank you.
As an author or, you know, aspiring editor and poet and so forth, really appreciated that aspect because you honed in on what makes the book, you know, what are all the processes and the wow moments and everything else. Really, that was priceless. So thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And I'm also echoing what Cheryl is asking about having an online version. Typically, the ones that are online are put up through the trust publications. So that's an option. And of course, there's always the option of ebooks, which are you can do self-publishing of your addendum. And, you know, that can be a fairly quick process. So I'm not going to volunteer. I have my hands full, but I also wanted to comment how much I enjoyed your excursions into the trust archives, because I just recently did that myself for a small piece of information that I needed, and it's quite a process. And
it's an experience.
It is an experience. Same thing is here in the Meher Center archives, and they're running a tight ship, and I understandably so, because when I saw Meher Baba's writing, they pulled God's hand, and I saw that, my gut feeling was to eat it, to devour it.
I love that.
I can see why the archivists have to protect what we have so sacred.
That's hilarious.
And, I know. So I just wanted to share that. And again, thank you. I look forward to your presentations on any topic.
Oh, thanks. Thanks. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Farish Day. Michal, your hand was up, then it went down.
Yeah. I just have to also, I was very impressed that you were writing 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day. I was really impressed by that. And I remember Dabauji going through the same thing with many hours.
Hmm.
and how Baba kept him at it, you know, like you said that you felt with Baba and you felt, I don't know how you said it, but you felt the magic of being there, not wanting to even leave the work.
Yes.
And that's what happened to Bauji as well.
Mhm.
I must say that I do not agree with you about Lord Meher. I find it so, I'm a bookworm from childhood, and I am just so enjoying it. It's the second time I'm reading it
Oh.
around, and I'm so enjoying it because I'm not spoon-fed, you know, I'm not spoon-fed by someone who's looking at it and trying to tell me the tale.
Mhm.
It's like I'm getting the impression of Baba's life coming out of it,
Hmm.
just growing out of it. And every time that I read it, it's different.
Mm.
And the different parts of Baba are coming out.
Mhm.
And so I'm really super enjoying it, and I find it very well written. Like Baba said, because Bauji said, I'm not a writer.
Mm.
Never wanted to be a writer.
Yeah.
And he said, no, you write, and everyone is going to love it. And he had to really pressure him to that. So he did a lot of tricks in order to Bauji to get feedback. So, but Bauji still didn't believe in that, and he just wrote it out of
Well, you know,
out of the shock that that's
Yeah.
why Baba left him with it, you know, to get out of the shock of being without Baba. So it's a different kind of writing because you are a writer from the beginning, from your childhood, and he was never that. But and so I am looking forward to putting it up on the web, and I am really like the idea that Cheryl presented, that you put in all the pieces.
Mhm.
And I'm really amazed at the research that you have been doing in thinking that you would write another one on the war, and thinking you would write another one on evolution, and seeing how Baba is just putting you into his stuff, you know, deeper and deeper and deeper. So, and I like the stories of Baba hugging you and you floating there together. So it was so beautiful to have. And thank you for your beautiful acceptance of the openness to these experiences. Thank you.
Welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you, Michal. I don't see any more hands, so I'm going to ask you, Claire. Is there more that we're going to do today?
Well, if you have more that you wanted to talk about, then we can. If not, and if no one else has any questions, then we can wrap up. I also will say though that makes us now, I think, 3 votes for releasing the author's cut. So, I mean,
We'll see. We'll see. I'll talk to Sheila about it on a good day and see
Yeah.
what she thinks.
yeah, because your
It could be
writing
a
is just so
complimentary book.
wonderful.
Pardon?
It could be a complimentary book. It could be another one next to it.
Yeah. And you just, I have so much respect for all the work that you put in. Like you said, 8 years. This is such a passion of love, a project of love. And I'd love to see just every single bit that got put in and taken out. Just, that'd be fantastic. But obviously, like you say, it is up to the author. So
Well, actually, in this case, it's up to Cherry and
yeah, that's
and the trust. It's out
yeah,
of my
that's true. Well, maybe if all of us go up there and pretty please.
Yeah. Try.
So, well, does anyone else have any more questions for Susan? Going once, going twice. Sold.
Good work. Good work.
All right. Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you everyone for joining us, and thank you to everyone who had some questions. I really appreciate that. And anyone who was here and didn't have any questions, I still appreciate you. It's nice to have plenty of people in the audience. That makes me feel good. And then thank you so much, Susan. This has been incredible. Thank you. Oh my gosh. Oh,
You're welcome. It's been fun
alrighty.
for me too.
Yes, thank you.
Claire, you beat Barbara Walters in sweetness.
Yeah,
thank
you're so
you.
sweet. You're so sweet. You're coming out with all these expressions. So beautiful.
Thank you. Well, I love what I do, and I've really been looking forward to this Zoom.
It's
It's been
it's shining out. It's shining
Yeah.
out.
well, thank you.
Hey, Baba, everybody.
Yay,
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Claire. Really beautiful.
you.
Thank
I
you,
think
Susan.
Thank you.
yesterday's trouble was a little kind of tantalized all of us. You know, it made it a little, give it a little what's the word? A little I don't know, give it a little more fire to the.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Well.
wanted more.
Yeah.
Okay,
Well,
Baba.
it was just a lesson in being flexible, and I mean, Susan, you mentioned that a little bit in some of the things you were saying. Just a reminder to go with the flow and be flexible. You know, we're not the ones making the decisions in the end of it. So,
Yeah, that's so true.
so, alrighty. Well, everyone, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. That is
Of
the end of our
course.
Hey, Baba.
Baba, keep
Baba ki jai.